In the recent polling, Republicans are starting to gain ground. They are getting closer in important key states such as Georgia, Ohio, Nevada, Arizona, Pennsylvania, all of the important states, as well as Wisconsin. We're seeing Republicans are gaining ground. The polling, despite being vastly wrong and inaccurate consistently throughout the past, it is still seeing overall a positive gain for Republicans. For example, starting off, we have Georgia, the Georgia Senate election. Herschel Walker against Raphael Warnock. Walker himself running a decent campaign, but not spending nearly as much as Warnock, who's spending 3 times the amount of money. A 3-to-1 ratio. And even then, he doesn't seem to be able to win any of the polls except for a garbage poll by Quinnipiac, which is just ridiculous. Their polls have never been that accurate, and I would really take everything they put out at face value. But again, overall, the Republicans are gaining. We see Herschel Walker, a candidate who was quite a bit down earlier on, and people were complaining he had candidate issues. He wasn't a good candidate. He couldn't win. But as we're getting closer to the election and more polls are being done on a likely voter basis, not registered voter, we're seeing that Republicans are starting to gain ground like they consistently have in the past. And again, the closer you get to the election, Republicans always seem to gain ground. On top of that, Republicans usually are underestimated in most swing states by most pollsters. They don't seem to be very accurate when it comes to the polling. But again, Herschel Walker is gaining ground on Warnock, which is good. He's actually gaining a fair bit of ground and surpassing him a fair bit. With the Fox Insider Advantage poll right here, they had Walker ahead by 3 points. Emerson, one of the more accurate pollsters, had Walker ahead by 2, and Trafalgar Group Walker ahead by 1. Now, Trafalgar Group has been a little all over the place recently. I really don't know what to think of their polling right now. I've seen some quite absurd polls, but it depends. We'll see what happens. Maybe their polls are right. Who knows? Maybe everything they're saying is right and they're not insane. But either way, right now, Herschel Walker has been gaining ground, and likely, if these polling trends continue, the trajectory of these polls continue in favor of Republicans and Walker like they seem to be doing, like it has done historically, I do think Herschel Walker will likely win, and I do think he'll likely win in a lean to maybe even likely margin if he can really get the campaign going, but realistically, a lean margin of 2 to 4 points seems more likely. I do think he'll be able to pull that off. Moving on, we also have the state of Wisconsin. Now, this one's an interesting one. Republicans do tend to get under-polled here, or they just don't seem to very accurately poll Republicans in the state. We have seen that in the past. I'll look more into that in a minute. But right now, we see Wisconsin governor polling, Michaels versus Evers. Right now, Evers is currently, well, he's ahead a little bit, but that's not going to be enough to keep up with the trajectory of polling trends right now, how they are shifting in favor of Republicans and historical trends, as well as considering the fact that polls underestimate Republicans. I cannot make that point clearer. And again, the more and more polls that are done on a likely voter basis, the more and more accurate the polls will get. As you can see here, this horrible poll by Fox News, a registered voter poll, big surprise. And again, Fox News, oh, well, it's conservative. First of all, no, it really isn't. And second of all, overall polling-wise, they're actually more left-wing when it comes to their polls. But again, you take that out, really the polls are even more in favor of Tim Michaels. And see, this is the thing, the other recent poll we got out of Marquette, this one's a okay pollster. They're not amazing, but this recent poll here had a third-party candidate, part of it, that was getting about 5% of the vote. Now, that candidate dropped out and endorsed Michaels, so that very likely will put him ahead overall over Evers. And not only that, the state itself, it is trending. I do think it's trending to the right, so that does help as well in that regard. So Tim Michaels is likely leading, and I do think he'll win it by about 3 to 4 points. Republicans, again, like I said, have been underestimated in the state in the past. We see this with Wisconsin's Senate race. So right now, Ron Johnson, he did recently, he was ahead in the recent Marquette poll. Likely he will be ahead despite the polling averages having Barnes ahead by 1.7. I don't buy that. I really don't. Again, this is the garbage Fox News poll using the registered voter instead of likely voter. Trafalgar Group, which again has been all over the place recently. But this is something to consider. What the polling averages had for Johnson in 2016. If we look at these polling averages, and he was an incumbent at this point as well, they had pollings where he was losing by 11 points for a while. We saw multiple polls where his numbers at best for him he ever got was 2.7 points below Feingold. And what did he end up winning that race by? 3.4 points. He won the race. That is a 5-point swing the other direction. So, first of all, what that should tell you is the polls are not accurate, and they underestimate Republicans consistently, especially in midterm years. This wasn't a midterm year, but especially in midterm years. And again, they had leans Dem. They say this was lean Dem. That's what the RCP ranking was. Right now, they say it's a toss-up. And right now, the polls only have Barnes at 1.7 overall average. So, assuming it's another 5-point swing, realistically, I do see Ron Johnson winning by about probably 4 points, maybe even 5. I could very well see him win by even more than that. It is possible. He's decently popular there. Not amazingly popular, but he's decently popular, and he's also incumbent, so that's going to help. Mandela Barnes will not win in the state. And honestly, for the most part, those Republican trends will continue over to Michaels, and Michaels will be the next governor. Now, lastly, we also have Nevada. So, we have Nevada right here, Adam Laxalt versus Cortez Masto. This one's an interesting race. There's been a decent amount of polls that have actually had Laxalt ahead, and I do think Laxalt in the end will likely win. He is a good candidate. Masto is a incumbent, but she's also an idiot. That doesn't really play well. But in a recent poll from even the Hill Emerson, Hill is not a conservative pollster by any means. They are not conservative. They're not going to construe anything in their favor. Now, you can see in this poll there is a decent amount of undecided. Both candidates at most have 42 and 41, so there isn't a decent amount undecided. But not only that, we have to consider those undecided voters. They're likely independent voters. And right now, independent voters, as we know, are splitting in a 9 to 10 point lead for Republicans. So realistically, those voters will go in favor of Laxalt. In the end, honestly, I don't see a case where Laxalt loses. The state of Nevada itself is probably one of the more winnable states for Republicans, one of the more winnable swing type states, the ones that are actually up for election, the ones that are in play for Republicans or Democrats. I do think it's probably one of the more winnable ones. Same goes for the governorship in the state. We can see Sisolak, the incumbent, is down in pretty much all of the polls on Lombardo recently. Now, there were some really bad registered voter polls here. They all had Sisolak ahead. But again, you look at the likely voter polls, and I've gone over this. Likely voter polls are more accurate. All of them except for one have Lombardo ahead. Lombardo is a good candidate. He's popular. He's the former sheriff of Clark County. That's going to help him a lot in the state. He likely will win it, as well as Laxalt will win his Senate seat. And these two will be one of the better governors and senators in the country. And just to drive this point home of the trajectory of the polls, how Republicans are going to do going forward, we have to look here at the 2010 generic congressional ballot, and we'll do the same with the 2014. Let's look at these polling trends. Republicans, yeah, overall they're doing a little better than the current polling, but look at this. So they were ahead for most of the polling. They ended up dropping off for a bit. There was points where they didn't do amazing, and then they started to gain again. They ended up gaining ground the closer you get to the election in the polling. The same thing is something that would happen in the 2022 polling that we are seeing right now. If you can see, you look a little closely, Republicans were ahead for a while, and then there was a short stint where the Democrats gained a bit of ground. And again, realistically, if trends are fairly consistent with the past, Republicans will gain ground on this, and I'd say probably end up being ahead in the polls by the November elections. But let's look back a little bit here. We'll look back at the 2014 generic vote. We'll see again, similar things here. This is even different. Republicans were behind most of the time, and then last minute they started to gain ground. And the polls ended up being wrong. They had Republicans averaged at 2.4% in the generic ballot. They ended up getting 5.7. So this is the thing to consider. The generic polling is never really that accurate, and it usually underestimates Republicans. Anyways, thanks for watching the video. If you liked it or you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing and leaving a like. Let me know what you thought of the video down below. Subscribe and follow me on all of my socials. Links are in the description as well. Anyways, that's all for now. Hope you guys have a good night.